called him an opioid, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a person. For somebody whose identity is that they're connected to Appalachia, which has an opioid crisis, that really is the darkest thing you could possibly say about Donald Trump.
During a recent appearance on Real Time with Bill Maher, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg dropped some truth bombs, both on the unholy alliance between tech bros and the Republican Party, as well as on JD Vance, Donald Trump's new vice presidential running mate, and they were glorious. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have a couple of clips to talk about in this video. Pete Buttigieg is the Secretary of Transportation. He ran for president in 2020 against President Biden, and he's widely recognized as one of the best rhetoricians, debaters, and communicators in the Democratic Party. This is a guy who routinely went up against Fox News hosts and Republicans and just steamrolled through them. I hope he makes more appearances on the Fox Propaganda Network and in these more hostile environments just to show the strength of the Democratic Party. He recently appeared on Real Time with Bill Maher. Now, Bill Maher is a centrist comedian. He prefers President Biden to Trump. There's no doubt about it. He's a harsh critic of Trump, but he also wants President Biden to drop out of the race. So it was a relatively hostile environment in that sense, in that Pete Buttigieg went there to represent the president to somebody who likes the president but wants him to drop out of the race. Regardless, there were a couple of standout moments that had nothing to do with Biden. And the first one is that Bill Maher asked Pete Buttigieg about, again, the seemingly contradictory and unholy alliance between these libertarian tech bros like Peter Thiel and David Sachs and others and the Republican Party. And Pete Buttigieg, in a way that very few people outside of Pete Buttigieg can, pretty much myth busted it and dispelled the problems, dispelled the myth and the mystery surrounding this unholy alliance.
So I think it's a profound contradiction, but maybe it's not that complicated. I know there are a lot of folks who say, what's going on with some of these Silicon Valley folks veering into Trump world with JD Vance and backing Trump? What are they thinking? Silicon Valley is supposed to be, they're supposed to care about climate. They're supposed to be, pro-science and rational and libertarians. So normally libertarians don't like authoritarians. What's up with that? I think it's actually, we've made it way too complicated. It's super simple. These are very rich men who have decided to back the Republican Party that tends to do good things for very rich men.
I couldn't agree with you.
I think that is perfectly encapsulated. I really do. I mean, he's right. On paper, if these people were really principled, if they were principled libertarians, if they were principled environmentalists and concerned about climate change, anthropogenic climate change, then yes, there would be no justification for their unholy and contradictory alliance with somebody like Donald Trump, who's a climate change, not even a skeptic, he's just an outright climate change denier. And not only is he not, libertarians tend to have beef with, I think, more on the left than the right, because I think that there is, at least on paper, a closer, the conservatives and libertarians tend to be closer on paper, right? But Donald Trump is an authoritarian, so he loves big government. Donald Trump wants a big, powerful government that's simply beholden to his whims and wishes, right? So an authoritarian and a libertarian should be as diametrically opposed as possible. But what Pete Buttigieg is laying out here is just the uncomfortable truth that for a lot of these so-called principled libertarian tech bros, what they care more about than their so-called principles is their bottom line, the dollars that they have at their disposal, which is why Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, and all these others flirt with the Republican Party, because at the end of the day, they care more about their finances than their principles. And the Republican Party, for all its faults, if there's one thing you can reasonably rely on them to do, it's to try to create tax cuts for those who need it the least. So that explains the unholy alliance. Then, later on in the conversation, Bill Maher asked Pete Buttigieg about JD Vance, Donald Trump's newly selected vice presidential running mate, a junior senator from Ohio, a man who has not really held public office. He's been a United States senator for 1 year. He was elected in the most recent term. And now, if Donald Trump wins the election, would ascend to the second highest ranking role in the executive branch of the federal government. And again, Pete Buttigieg kind of lays it out pretty clearly about who JD Vance really is.
Knew a lot of people like him when I got to Harvard. I found a lot of people like him who would say whatever they needed to get ahead. And 5 years ago, that seemed like being the anti-Trump Republican, so that's what he was. Talked about how he was unfit, how he was cynical, called him an opioid, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a person, but definitely a really But I mean, for somebody whose identity is that they're connected to Appalachia, which has an opioid crisis, that really is the darkest thing you could possibly say about Donald Trump, at least in public. But behind the scenes, apparently, he's actually calling him Hitler, right? Seriously. 5 years later, the way he gets ahead is that he's the greatest guy since sliced bread. And I actually watched this exact same process with somebody else I got to know in my days in the Midwest, which was my former governor, Mike Pence.
The reason that I think this is so important, I mean, it's almost like Pete Buttigieg watches Pondering Politics. I like to think that he likes and subscribes, as should you, because I made the same observation when JD Vance was confirmed to be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate. There are some enormous similarities and ironies that intertwine Mike Pence, Donald Trump's former running mate, his former vice president, and JD Vance. I mean, you can go down to the superficial. Pence, Vance, right? Phonetically similar. But they also have a lot of similarities in the sense that, JD Vance is from Ohio. Mike Pence is from Indiana as well. So they come from these rural states that have a conservative bent to them. And what's interesting is they have both set principle aside for the sake of political expedience. And the difference is Mike Pence has come full circle, right? So as Pete Buttigieg points out, Mike Pence was this devoutly evangelical politician with enormously strict views on social politics, gay marriage, the role of women, et cetera, and so forth, but also presented this very calm, poised, affable, sincere belief. Like Mike Pence always gave the impression that as crazy as his beliefs are, he sincerely held them. Then he sacrificed those principles for the sake of political expedience to join Donald Trump, who is as far from Christ as a politician can possibly be, or certainly Christ's teachings, a malignant narcissist with authoritarian impulses who says that he's never had to apologize or beg forgiveness because he's perfect. And to say nothing of his sordid sexual history, the fact that he cheated on his wife with a porn star, multiple infidelities, a congenital liar, et cetera, and so forth. Then after 4 years, the final straw was, as Pete Buttigieg points out in this video, you should definitely check out the full interview. The final straw was Mike Pence couldn't bear to fold to pressure by Trump to elevate Trump above the Constitution. So as Pete Buttigieg says, he found the last shred of principle within him to say no. And then, as he points out, like that, those 4 glorious years ended with Trump supporters threatening and attempting to hang Mike Pence. JD Vance is like a step behind, and maybe his story will end differently, right? JD Vance also publicly and privately said terrible things about Donald Trump, which also just happened to be true. As a matter of fact, he was more of an outspoken critic of Donald Trump than Mike Pence ever was, right? Even though they both had reason to dislike Trump. But like Mike Pence, JD Vance is sacrificing all of that for a bite at the apple. Now, maybe whereas Mike Pence found some shred of dignity and is trying to have some sort of road to redemption, potentially, JD Vance may not. JD Vance may succeed where Mike Pence failed and just become the heir apparent to the MAGA movement and suppress his principles for the sake of political expediency all the way to the very end. The man's 39 years old. He's incredibly ambitious. But I think it's worth pointing these things out, the parallels between these two men, that both of Donald Trump's vice presidential running mates have, at one point or another, repeatedly publicly condemned Trump's character, his intelligence, his principles, or lack thereof. This is something that we should not let the American people forget, certainly not swing state independence. Like, hey, listen, don't take it from us. Take it from the guy that Donald Trump chose, handpicked to run beside him. This is what that guy has to say about Donald Trump. And I think Pete Buttigieg beautifully articulated the case on Bill Maher. Let me know what you think in the comments.